This is going to be over notes, chapter 2, the chemistry notes, objective 11. We're actually going to talk about carbohydrates in this one. Okay, so before we get into carbohydrates, we do need to give a few definitions here, the difference between inorganic and organic. And on the test, you're going to need to be able to, when given a compound, just tell me if it's an organic or an inorganic compound. That's about it. Bottom line is inorganic does not contain carbon atoms, whereas organic compounds do. So, for instance, if I was to give you H2O, would that be considered inorganic or would it be considered organic? Well, H2O is inorganic because it doesn't contain carbon. Okay, what about this one? NaCl. Would that one be considered inorganic or would it be considered organic? Well, this one would be inorganic because, again, it doesn't contain carbon. Cl, that's chlorine. What about glucose? C6H12O6. This one would be organic because it contains carbon. Now, macromolecules. Macro means large, so we're talking about really large molecules here. And they are bonded together, covalently bonded together. So that means they're sharing those electrons. There are 4 classes of macromolecules that are found in living matter. They are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And you've probably heard of some of these. Maybe nucleic acids not so much, but the carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins you've probably heard of. These are huge molecules. They all have different structures and functions. These are going to be long, complex chains of molecules, again, because we said they were macromolecules. Polymers, these are the ones that poly means many, whereas mono means one. So what you do is you have a bunch of monomers linked together to make this big, huge, long polymer. It would be similar to saying you've got a train linked together, all the little cars of the train linked together. And each car would be the monomer. But the entire train would be the polymer because it's made of all of the little monomers joined together. So that's kind of the same way that we're going to be making these macromolecules. They're going to be made of a monomer that's joined together to make this polymer. Okay, so a polymer is a large molecule, or it's the macromolecule, composed of many repeating subunits. Like we were using our train situation just a second ago. Notice they were all train cars. It's not like we stuck a plane in the middle of all that, so they were all similar. The monomer can be bonded to other identical or similar molecules. So again, the individual is the monomer, where the entire monomers all linked together. That's what makes the polymer. Okay, so the first macromolecule that we're going to take a look at are carbohydrates. Now, what you're going to need to know is examples, structure, functions for all of these, okay? So there are actually 3 kinds of carbohydrates. You've got your monosaccharides, your disaccharides, and your polysaccharides. If, again, you were to break the word down, mono means one, saccharide means sugar. So a monosaccharide is a single sugar. You do need to know the examples of some single sugars, such as glucose, fructose, ribose. These are all individual sugar molecules. The primary one that we're going to be talking about in this class is glucose. Now, disaccharides, they're made of 2 sugars that are joined together. So if you take like two glucose molecules and link them together, or a glucose and a fructose and link them together, then you get what's called a disaccharide. And some examples, you don't have to know the examples: sucrose, maltose, lactose. You guys have probably heard of lactose before. That's a big hot topic because everybody's lactose intolerant. That's the one you find in milk. Sucrose is common table sugar. Maltose is sugar that's found in milk. Polysaccharide, poly means many. So this is the actual polymer is the polysaccharide because it's the big one. Now, you do need to know the examples of the polysaccharides, which are a bunch of sugars. Now, we're not talking like 3, 4. We're talking about thousands of sugars linked together. And this would be starch, which you've probably heard of, glycogen, chitin, and cellulose. Now, we're actually not going to talk about chitin in this class. So starch, glycogen, and cellulose. So again, these are just the general structures of monosaccharides, and they kind of are hexagons. Okay, you've got like 6-sided structures here, all made up of C6H12O6, for example, for glucose. So these are all considered organic molecules. So a lot of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in varying amounts. Now, if you take those monosaccharides and link them together, you get disaccharides. Again, look at your general structure still. We're talking about hexagons, 6-sided structures. So when you take two monosaccharides and join them together by a covalent bond, you get a disaccharide. Now, polysaccharides, again, these are these hexagons. So we've got glucose is what we're looking at here. So we've got glucose bonded to glucose, bonded to glucose, bonded to glucose, all joined together by these covalent bonds. Again, hundreds, thousands of these, and that would be a polysaccharide. So you need to know the examples of the polysaccharides and their functions. Starch is a form of sugar found in plants. So when you hear starch, you kind of think maybe potatoes and stuff like that. Those are starchy foods. Bread is another one that's got it in there. But this is how plants store sugar. They make sugar in the leaves, they store it in their roots, and use it for later. Glycogen is how animals, such as you, store sugar. So plants store sugar in the form of starch, which you guys know what that tastes like. That's easily broken down. Animals store sugar in the form of what's called glycogen. Where is glycogen stored? So we just said, starch is stored in the roots of plants typically. But where do people store glycogen at? It's found in the liver and in muscle cells. And this is a short-term energy storage. So when you need energy, your body will go to the liver and get glycogen and break it down into glucose, and will go to the muscle cells and break that down into glucose. So glycogen is a short-term energy storage. Cellulose is plant structure. So this is what gives plants their upright structure, because their cell walls. Plants have cell walls. You do not. Plants do. And it's a rigid structure. And what is that cell wall made of? It's made of cellulose, also known as fiber. This is not something that you have the ability to break down. Like you eat it. You eat plants, corn, all kinds of stuff. Lettuce, all that has got cellulose in it, and you're not able to break that down. That's what's called dietary fiber. Starch versus cellulose. Why is it that you can break down starch and get the nutrients from that? You can break starch down and get the sugar out of it, but you can't break down cellulose. It has to do with the bond holding the glucose molecules together. So again, each one of these is a glucose molecule. Cellulose and cellulose, they're just glucose molecules. But the difference is the bonds. Take a look. In starch, all of the bonds are going the same direction, but take a look in cellulose here. We've got one going up, one going down. And humans do not have the ability to break the bonds that put the glucose molecules together to form cellulose. humans do have the ability to break the bonds that form starch. That's called amylase, and that's actually found in saliva, believe it or not. So that's why when you eat bread or crackers or something like that, you immediately get that sweet taste. Okay, because the amylase in the saliva is actually breaking that starch down pretty fast. Cellulose stays together. And if you were just wondering what glycogen looks like, we said glycogen is stored in the liver and muscle cells. This huge molecule here, if you were to take a close-up view, is all these individual glucose molecules joined together. So when your body needs sugar, what it does is it just breaks those bonds and releases that sugar into the bloodstream. But in the meantime, in the storage form, it's just all of these glucose molecules joined together, being saved for later. And this stays around about 24 hours or so. Okay, so that's it for carbohydrates.